YouTube and LinkedIn, bringing you yet another exciting episode of the Top Innovator Series. This is where we dive into proven leadership ideas, game-changing strategies, and of course, the brilliant minds behind them. My name is Joseph Martens, and I'm thrilled to introduce today's guest to you. With us today is Murli Buluswar. Murli is the head of analytics at a US personal bank at Citi. Before that, he held several other innovation-focused executive roles, including being the Chief Science Officer at AIG and being the VP Insight and Innovation at Farmers Insurance. Now, what you will also quickly see when you look him up is that he has put his leadership philosophy right into the banner at LinkedIn. And I thought that was very neat because it gives you a snapshot right away who he is. Driven by outcomes, guided by curiosity, data, and learning. Murli, it's an absolute pleasure having you with us here today.
Hi, Yusuf. Thank you for the opportunity to share some thoughts and have a conversation with you. It's a delight to be here with you today.
Awesome. Let's dive right into leadership. Topic is leadership, and you are super accomplished in the career that you've had, many successful milestones. So I'd be curious to know, what is the ingredient for that success? When you reflect on that journey, what do you think are some of the key reasons why you got to the point where you are today?
Goodness, Yusuf, it's life is about a continuous learning journey for all of us. And so there's no real point of arrival. But every experience, every meaningful interaction that you have with people, it's an opportunity to be able to reflect on how we choose to evolve. I'm almost allergic to the word change, frankly, because change is very black and white. I very much believe in this notion of constant evolution by degrees, because that's something that is honoring where you are, while also recognizing how you might choose to evolve, versus thinking about life in terms of good and bad. One of the books that inspired me in my life many years ago was written by an author named Daniel Pink, and it's called Drive. And it has a very simple but extremely wise thesis in my view, which is great leaders recognize how to galvanize people to achieve more than they could have achieved as individuals. And in order to get the power of the collective to be moving in unison, in complementary ways, there's three things that leaders should actually be thinking about inculcating in their teams. Number one is autonomy. Number two is mastery. And number three is purpose, in no particular order. And the thesis of the book was autonomy, give people breathing room so that they have some freedom to make the choices in order to be most effective professionally within a team. Mastery is give people an opportunity to be part of something where they're learning and growing, and they're building skills that increases their personal and professional relevance and builds confidence in them as to their ability to continue to grow. And purpose is a simple notion of give people a galvanizing common identity that is bigger than all of them and that is worthy, that they come together to be part of achieving something meaningful that goes beyond their individual roles. So those three notions really stuck with me quite a bit. And if you were to ask me in 30 seconds to say, give me sort of a central thesis of what's guided you, that's actually been a piece of it. This notion of autonomy, mastery, and purpose.
Yep, got it. I really liked, so I'd love to dive into what you said there. Let's start with what you said about change, right? That change portrays something that might be black and white, and it doesn't really encapsulate the real progression that is there. I really think that's neat. And it brings up the question for me that all of us are struggling with finding some level of comfort, right? Being satisfied with what we have, where we are, which has the risk of leading to stagnation, and of course, growth, right? How do you get people to step out of that desire to be comfortable, of being just okay with where things are? How do you instill that spirit of there is more, let's move, let's remain on a pursuit of something?
The starting point for that, Yusuf, is making sure that you're supporting people such that they have a healthy level of self-compassion. In my view, sustained growth cannot come from a place of self-criticism or negativity. It has to come from a measured place of appreciating who you are, how far you've come, while recognizing how you could evolve should you choose to. So for me, it's this
Great.
notion of helping people see things in terms of what life, their career or success could look like in a 12, 18, 24 months time horizon, why that could be meaningful to them, and how they can also have agency not only in themselves, but play a pivotal role in the growth and learning and the collective successes of others, and how that broader mission is so much more fun because it's inspiring.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's that combination, right, between being solid where we are at the moment, being okay where it is, and at the same time there is growth. There is such a greater vision ahead of us that we could aspire to. I'm curious, where did you pick that up? When you think back of your career, was that something that's always been clear to you, or was there an aha moment where you realized that matters a lot, that really is important, I need to put this into the quiver of my toolkit?
Like most things in life, I think, Yusuf, our stories are a combination of innately how our brains are wired.
Okay.
Number one. Number two, that to me is pathos. The ethos or the experiences we have in our lives growing up, observing good behavior on parts of others, but also observing non-positive behaviors by others, and being able to use that data and reflecting upon what that means for us. And then being able to also having an inherent understanding of what is it that you do well, what is it that you don't do as well, and how do you sort of balance leaning into what you do well further while making sure that the areas where you have a little bit more of a gap do not become a fundamental hindrance. And so when I started in the space of data science and statistics and such many years ago, what I realized, Yusuf, was that I am inherently a connector.
Okay.
So think of it as if there's 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle. The way my mind works is I like to see the 1,000-piece puzzle in its totality. I'd like to be able to imagine it first before I get into the individual pieces. And so I recognized that what got me excited is this ability to zoom in and zoom out, and having this belief that in order to be effective, you have to be constantly changing the aperture of your camera lens to be able to see the breadth, and then to be able to lean into the depth. And that allows you to sort of think about not just the insights and such, but also the broader cultural and organizational and human context in which you operate and in which you'd like to be able to drive some positive change.
Yeah, the puzzle is a neat analogy, right? Starting with the box top, or looking first at the box top, because otherwise, how do we put the puzzle pieces together? How do we really put this together? Tell me more about some of the experiences that shaped your leadership philosophy, right? You said it's large, or to some extent, it's the experiences that we make that shape what we do today. What would you say was an important experience that you've made that shaped how you lead today?
Oh, goodness. I've accumulated so many years that I've got lots of data collected. I'll give you a couple, if I may.
Yep.
In my younger years, I observed adults around me engaging in, shall I call it, non-emotionally intelligent behavior.
Okay.
And I remember observing that and recognizing the non-positive impact it had on me and those around me, and making a mental note of how I would want to be different. I'd want to experience me differently, and I'd want everybody around me to experience me differently than that. So that data collection and that being able to reflect upon that was very helpful for me. That was a
Yep.
big piece of it. The other big piece that I'd say, Yusuf, is over the years, I have learned that wanting to be liked is overrated.
I love it, Murli. I love it. Yeah.
Let me unpack that,
Okay.
which is when wanting to be liked becomes an objective, it leads you to behave in a way that is agreeable, and that desire to be agreeable creates distance between what you believe to be the truth and how you actually interact with the world around you. And I realize that in some of my prior corporate roles as a change agent, while I was respected for my intellect, I was liked for who I was as a human being, I shied away from conflict. I shied away from disagreement. And so I allowed people to have their own reality without challenging, because I wanted to be agreeable. And that led me down a path of making mistakes and not being as forceful in my perspectives. And where I've evolved to over the last 5 to 10 years in particular is to say, as a professional, I want to be trusted on my human values and my transparency, my authenticity, and I want to be honored for my competence. Being liked is an outcome, it's not a goal. And in my mind, what I've learned to differentiate, Yusuf, is a conflict of task from an interpersonal conflict. And allow me to just give you a little bit more on that, which is, in my view, a conflict of task is, you might say we should go left and I might say we should go right. And we can actually debate that and we can make a better decision as a collective on what's appropriate given our common goals. A conflict of task is desirable. It is actually required in order for you to break through and drive innovation. An interpersonal conflict is when you might not trust me, or I might have other forms of misgivings about you. And that sort of creates an enormous amount of space for distrust. And I think it's very important in life to be able to differentiate a conflict of task from an interpersonal conflict and embrace a conflict of task, because that's one of the essence of creativity and groups being able to achieve more and break through barriers, whereas interpersonal conflict is much more problematic. Never confuse the two, never conflate the two.
Yeah. And you shared with me a slide with some of your leadership philosophy before, and it reminds me of something that you put on there. It's the distinction between, like you say, opinion and fact, right? And what happens in many cases, though, we notice the facts, right? But we turn them into the opinion. And these opinion very often are about our relationship, right? Is there trust? Does he like me? What's going on here? Or he's always behaving to me like that. How do you stop people from interpreting that way, right? So it's one thing unraveling this for ourselves, and even harder because we notice it more easily in other people. When you lead your team, how do you get them to separate facts from opinion? How do you get them to separate on where's the content disagreement as opposed to the people disagreement?
Excellent question. I want to share with you and the listeners, if I may, Yusuf, a quote that I find very profound. It's by the author F. Scott Fitzgerald. And it goes something to the effect that I'm paraphrasing, which is, true intelligence is the ability to hold competing ideas in your mind and yet function effectively. And one of the things that I try to teach myself is have the consciousness where when I am forming views, to be able to be my own most challenging critic, to say how much of this is fact and how much of this is perspective. And if somebody else were in that conversation, ideally perhaps somebody with a contrarian view, what might they say? And so teaching myself that ability to enter the reality of somebody else, and also inviting them to enter my reality and also fundamentally asking the team, facts, data, things that are tangible and objective. I want to be able to discuss those, and having opinions and having judgment and drawing conclusions is part of being human.
Yeah.
And that is perfectly fine. But before we get to the opinion or the conclusion, which might be subjective, let's actually play with the data that guided that, and let's try and understand that, and let's try to imagine a world where that other party might also be in on this conversation. What would their contrarian view be, so that we can actually question our own assumptions and understand our own thinking processes better.
Yeah.
And dare I say, if I may add one last thought, is reducing the number of adjectives and adverbs in our vocabulary.
Okay, now you've got me intrigued. I saw this in your in your leadership philosophy, and I was curious. Say more about that. Why are adjectives and adverbs a bad thing or to be avoided or so? I'm curious now.
I'm not saying they're necessarily a bad thing.
Okay.
But adjectives and adverbs, particularly adjectives, are words of conclusion. They're words of judgment.
Okay.
And judgment inherently is perception.
Okay.
And perception could be based on truth. It could also be based on a biased understanding of a scenario.
Of course.
So being able to make sure that before we get to the conclusion that is almost very deterministic, let's actually ask ourselves, what is the objective data first? So to create a little bit of a chasm between the objective truth that we can, generally speaking, agree upon, and the subjective conclusion, which may or may not, which we're more likely to disagree upon, and making sure that those two are not intertwined, but there's a clear delineation between the two, so that you're able to play with those two ideas differently, not at the same time.
Interesting. My mind is spinning now, and I'm thinking about running some AI over transcripts of conversations, figuring out what percentage adjectives and adverbs are in there, and lowering them. But that's an intriguing thought, paying attention to them and lowering them. Let me ask you one more question about your past sort of leadership, past experience, and then I would like to shift to today. Talk to me about some mentors, about some heroes, some guiding characters that you had in your life, trusted advisors. What was some advice that you got from someone that really stuck with you? Important advice that maybe even at the time you felt like it didn't make sense, or you didn't want to hear it, or something like that. And then there was a moment where you said, this person really got it right. And how could I not see it?
I have to say this, Yusuf, in my formative years in school, my teachers called me extraordinary.
Okay. Adjective.
Except they were two separate words. They weren't the single word. So I have gotten, so they said, Murli, you're extra.
Okay.
So if I had a list of all the pieces of advice that people have given me over the years, redirecting and such, I would really have a mile full of notes. However, I'm going to give you the one that lives in me every single day. That's an important synthesis of many tidbits that many people have shared with me.
Yep.
And it's a little bit of an extreme view, but bear with me for a moment, which is that the best that somebody will see in you is the worst that you see in yourself. And life is about creating the person you want to see and be when you look in the mirror. And you have to do that before you expect somebody else to perceive you in a certain way. So it's this notion of, before I can expect that Yosef will experience me in a certain way or has to have certain views of me, I have to believe that. And I have to play a very active role in creating that reality for myself, both in my mind and the reality of that objective. Only then can I have a chance of other people seeing me the way I see myself.
Yep. Yeah. The contrasting thesis to that comes to mind for me is the fake it till you make it. And what you're saying there is pretty much the other way around, right? So don't fake it, first be it. Step into that role fully, because you can't fake it, right? Ultimately, you are the person who you are, and you need to show up the way you really are and be fully that person.
Have that belief, develop that belief, develop that reality inside of you first, and then you can radiate that reality to the rest of the universe. But if you don't see yourself that way, sustainability of that is going to be very, very difficult. And why do I say that, Yusuf? I say that because about, I think, 11 years ago, is it? Yes. No, actually, pardon me, 13 years ago, I had the fortune of being one of the first chief science officers in corporate America when I joined AIG. And I remembered that vividly to this day. Is I always believed I had the intellectual capacity to be successful. However, there was a lingering doubt in my mind as to whether I was worthy of that role. And while I'm very proud of the team that I built and what we accomplished, as I look back, I also recognize that when that element of my not fully embracing the full potential, not just from an intellectual or strategic or technical standpoint, which I felt very good about, but more from a broader humanistic standpoint of I am worthy and I'm capable, and there's a reason why I'm here. It's because I am that person that can guide this organization in profound ways. I didn't always see that consistently in me. And when I didn't see that consistently in me, it was hard for others to experience that belief in me on that scale as well. And so playing with that has really taught me a lot about that self-belief.
And many other leaders at some point experience that self-doubt, of course, right? Getting out of that is self-management to some extent. The experiences that we make, that's a struggle. Thank you for sharing that.
And it's healthy. It's healthy to have that self-doubt. It's how you handle that self-doubt that shapes you as a person and a leader, and that shapes, what is the scale effect of you as a human being in terms of the teams that you have the fortune of leading, and the impact that you have on their self-identity and their careers and their broader lives.
I mean, that opens up the door to the obvious question: how did you manage it? How did you deal with that self-doubt? How did you get out of it, Murli?
I floundered my way through it. Number one.
Okay.
Number two, rarely in life are we struck by epiphanies like we're struck by lightnings. I think that evolution and growth is a lot more perspiration. There has to be inspiration, but it's not inspiration alone. It's a lot of perspiration, and it ties, frankly, to the theme that I shared a couple of moments ago, Yusuf, of wanting to be liked. And I realized that I wanted to be liked because I wasn't as comfortable in my own skin as I needed to be. And when I shed the desire to be liked, I became phenomenally comfortable in my skin, and the scale of my impact widened quite a bit. And as a consequence, in general, not without exceptions, I'm probably more likable now than I was back then.
Yeah, because you are more solid in yourself. Yeah, and people respect that, right? People notice it, they respect it, and Let me switch to looking at today, Murli. And this is not about companies, it's not about positions, job titles, projects, or anything like that. It's about you and where you are in your leadership. When you look at where you are at the moment, how would you describe your current leadership? Not as a philosophy, but where you are in your own growth, right? So not the 3 bullet points of this is important about leadership, but describe where you are in leadership right now. What is done? What is still to be done? Give me a sense of that.
We're all works in progress, of course. This is never a point of arrival. And the thing that I continue to work upon is I'm candid, I'm transparent,
Mm-hmm.
I'm authentic. Those are core tenets of how I want people to experience me. And the thing that I'm trying to balance with that is how do you be direct and candid and walk that perfect fine line of not understating things such that people aren't really getting your message. On the other hand, also being able to communicate your expectations of people and their expectations of you in a way that is appropriately empathetic and compassionate, but also honest and candid. So being able to separate out how might somebody perceive something that you say with, do I believe I have the integrity and clarity with which I am thinking and I'm communicating, and making sure that I'm not giving people too much room to draw non-positive conclusions, and making sure that I'm communicating in a way that shows that, hey, I care about them. I care about what we
Yeah.
want to accomplish
Yeah.
together, and I care about the fact that they care about me. And those fundamental tenets are important, and the building blocks around that we're going to have to course correct. But to be able to have the honesty to be sincere and direct, and yet at the same time not being perceived to be judgmental or harsh, to me, having that authenticity and simplicity is so important, because it's not just tied to your work as a leader of a large team in the corporate world. It ties to who you are as a human being, and how everybody else in your ether experiences you
Yeah.
in your network.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's a lot of balancing things, right? Balancing between one area and another, and finding the fine line to walk between to work between them. Yeah. Let me, in a similar vein of the question before, if we were to have this conversation again in 3-5 years time, something like that.
Yeah.
And let's speculate now. We don't know the future, but we can speculate. What do you think you would say is different about your leadership then?
Great question. There's a tangible aspect to it, and there is a philosophical aspect to it. The tangible and the tangible aspect to it is a manifestation of the philosophical aspect of it. The tangible outcome would be, I have been able to play a meaningful role in galvanizing a large institution such as Citi to embrace the power of generative and agentic AI to rethink processes and decision making in a way that has allowed the firm to be much more fit for purpose for where the world is headed.
Okay.
And to be organized in a way, and to have embraced tools and technology, and through that culture in a way that makes it one of the beacons of what it means to be able to adapt and evolve in a world of profound disruption through AI-enabled technology. So that's one piece of it. The other piece of it is I'd like to have been able to say that I've got a heightened sense of understanding how people interpret me, how people experience me, and that I'm consistently able to read that, and I'm choosing selectively to engage in that to try and shape their reality of me in a way that I would consider to be more authentic. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is how we perceive something has an objective component to it, most certainly.
Right.
But it also has a subjective component.
Yep.
And the subjective component can be driven by how our neurons fire. And it is also driven by community, or how we were raised, family environment, and you know, sort of culture, and so on and so forth. And so being able to parse that out and having hyper awareness on how somebody is experiencing me, understanding why, and making a conscious choice in instances where I would want to lean in to be able to hopefully sculpt it a little bit, and instances where I'm just going to choose to observe it floating by without feeling the need to try to shape it, because I have some ability to influence, but I don't have a profound ability to influence the ethos and pathos of people. And recognizing that logic and data facts are critical, but they're utterly incomplete in how people process information and knowledge and how we make decisions. And while I'd like to think a pretty deep appreciation for that, having that be in a whole new level 3 years from now, and having that clarity and wisdom to be much less reactive. So I guess to put it simply, if you were checking my pulse in course of a day, I would want it to be a flat line, not at zero.
That was a dangerous phrasing there.
I would want it to be at a flat line in the 50s or so, sans my actually doing any physical exertion,
right?
Because I'm able to ingest knowledge, data, conversations, but those knowledge, data, and conversations are not creating volatility in my pulse rate, because I'm very placid and measured and thoughtful in both how I communicate and how I'm also reacting and processing the communication of others.
Okay, got it. Yeah. Fantastic goal. Absolutely fantastic goal. So I'm looking forward to our conversation in 5 years already to hear from you how you got there and how that went. Now, you shared with me before we spoke a couple of thoughts of your leadership philosophy, and I would like to, just at the end, before we wrap it up, ask you about a couple of them and unpack them for us. Here is one that I was intrigued. Many of them are intriguing, but let me just pick a couple of them. What are you doing with your second arrow? What is the second arrow? What does that mean, Murli?
In Buddhism, I believe it's Buddhism, they have this 2-arrow principle or narrative, which is the first arrow is something that happens to us. It's circumstances. Perhaps somebody yelled at us on while we were driving on the road, or somebody was rude to us, or at work we were pushed aside, or a whole series of non-positive things that could happen to many of us at different points, and that's based on something external that is happening to us. And we don't necessarily control that quite as much. It's circumstances, situations, the vagaries of other people and organizations can create non-positive experiences for us. The second arrow is what I would think of as more endogenous, which is how are we going to react to that situation or that event? And that second arrow we hold. So it's very much within our control, our sphere
choice
of influence, and we have 100% agency over that. So particularly when something non-positive happens to us, we get to decide, do we let that event, that action fully drive our reaction? And so we're almost victims of somebody else making the move, so to speak, in ways that are counterproductive to our mental health and whatever outcomes we're looking to accomplish? Or do we say, no, I have complete agency in how I process this fact, this situation, and therefore how I react, and I'm going to own that agency, and I'm going to make highly deliberate choices and highly intentional choices on how I react to a set of circumstances.
I love it, right? And there is a gap between that first and second arrow. They are not connected, because sometimes we think I'm just reacting because something happens, and I'm negating the fact that I've made a choice in that.
Indeed. And if I may say this, Joseph, when we react like that, our pulse rate is probably going up.
Yes, of course, right? Because typically we are reacting to some kind of hurtful thing, some injury,
Yes, indeed.
someone has upset us, something like that, right? And I feel like I have to react now and maybe retaliate or be angry or withdraw. It's also a reaction, right? But I feel like the other person triggered it, and I like this concept. It's a second arrow, and I'm the one shooting it. It's not the first one continuing. Nice. Let me dig into one other one, if I may.
Yeah.
You're asking, do you ascribe to mountain monastery metropolis approach to innovation? What is that approach to innovation? What's the mountain monastery metropolis approach to innovation?
So again, I want to say this, Josef. I am an author of very few of these isms that I've picked up over time.
They're Murli-isms, right? You call them Murli-isms at some point. I think that's neat.
I think they're ideas that you pick up and then you sort of internalize them, but it's like generative AI. It's not creative AI. We're rarely pure creators, but we can assemble thoughts and experiences and ideas in ways that can be stitched together. Okay. So what I meant by that is when you're trying to drive some large-scale change, innovation in an organization, first of all, you've got to recognize that it's not just the technical solution. You're trying to re-architect an entire system, an entire ecosystem of processes and people and functions and such. And that means that you're redesigning what decisions are made and how decisions are made. And there are people whose lives are affected by those decisions. And so understanding that any innovation is probably only this much of the actual technical solution, which might be just the tip of the iceberg, below the surface level is the much bigger change management. How does that tie to mountain, monastery, and metropolis?
Right.
If I have an idea, what I've got to be able to do is imagine the analogy of going off to the mountain by myself and meditating on the idea by myself and play with it, be my own toughest critic in thinking about why that might work or not work, how it could not work, and sort of going back to that F. Scott Fitzgerald quote that I mentioned earlier, challenging my own assumptions and understanding, number one. Once it passes that filter, then I go to the monastery. And the concept of the monastery is a tight-knit group of individuals who care about you, who care about your success, but who will also be your toughest, compassionate critics, because they will not hesitate to speak their views, recognizing that you've got a wonderful relationship with them and you know their intent is to help you think and act more clearly.
Yeah.
And once it passes those two phases, then you can open it up to the broader metropolis, where there's all sorts of forces that might actually kill it, but now you've actually built the resilience for this idea to survive and thrive, at the same time adapt to the vagaries of the broader organization that will come oftentimes with good intentions, oftentimes with sort of maybe competing views, maybe a sliver of the time perhaps with also non-positive intent, but that ability to take all of that force and to not only be able to withstand it, but to be able to adjust and adapt, and most importantly, thrive because of those forces, not despite of those forces.
Got it. Okay. Nice. And I was trying to fill it with meaning before I heard your answer. I went in a totally different direction. And I really like this idea of an expanding community, essentially, right? And it's an expanding horizon that you expose the innovation to. Murli, thank you so much. This was an awesome conversation. I really enjoyed how deeply reflective you are about the leadership journey. And I appreciate you sharing personal insights that are helpful for people to pick up and find their own journey in that. That was awesome. Thank you, Murli.
This has been an absolute delight, Josef. And if I may share one parting thought, many years ago, an executive coach shared with me a view that stuck with me, which is the most profound question that you could be asking yourself on a daily basis in your life can actually be your voicemail greeting on your phone, which is, who are you and what do you want? And I'm eternal search for a thoughtful response to those two questions. And if I could just challenge the listeners to be thinking about that, I think that inner dialogue is a critical part of our continued growth narrative.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
For everyone else out there, remember to like, subscribe, and comment on the video. And we look forward to seeing you again at the next episode of the Top Innovator series. Until then, keep your brain cells active.